Some secrets are buried so deep that even the earth refuses to keep them hidden. In the suffocating humidity of Mexico City, DEA analyst Maria Castillo descended into the tunnel that had made headlines around the world. Everyone thought they knew the story. El Chapo had escaped through an elaborate underground passage, but as Maria's flashlight pierced the darkness beyond the known tunnel, she discovered something that made her blood run cold. The passage didn't end where the reports claimed. It connected to a vast network of forgotten subway tunnels, sealed since 1960, where the walls were covered in decades-old scratches, desperate markings left by human hands. For 30 years, Maria had built her career hunting traffickers, never knowing she was walking in the footsteps of her own family's tragedy. Her sister Carmen had vanished during their childhood vacation to Mexico City in 1985, and now, in these abandoned depths, Maria found a faded hair ribbon that looked disturbingly familiar. As she held it in her trembling hands, one question echoed through the tunnels. How many people knew the truth about what really happened down here, and how high did this conspiracy reach? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The ribbon slipped through Maria's fingers like a whisper from the past, floating down to rest among the debris of forgotten decades. Her hands shook as she crouched in the stagnant air, the beam of her flashlight creating a narrow cone of reality in the overwhelming darkness. 30 years in law enforcement had taught her to compartmentalize, to separate the professional from the personal, but here in these forsaken tunnels, that careful discipline crumbled. She forced herself to breathe, to think like the analyst she'd trained herself to be. The ribbon could belong to anyone. Thousands of people had probably passed through these tunnels over the decades, but even as her rational mind constructed these arguments, her heart hammered against the possibility that had been buried since she was 17 years old. "Castillo, you copy?" The radio crackled with static, pulling her back to the immediate moment. "Copy," she managed, her voice steadier than she felt. "How much further does this thing go? We've got media breathing down our necks up here, and the Mexican authorities want their crime scene back." Maria swept her light across the tunnel walls, taking in the scope of what lay before them. The official reports claimed El Chapo's tunnel ended at the small house where his motorcycle waited. Clean, simple, case closed. But this network stretched far beyond anything in those sanitized files. "Give me another hour," she said into the radio. "You've got 30 minutes. Then we need you topside for the briefing." The line went dead, leaving her alone with the sound of dripping water and her own ragged breathing. Maria had built her reputation on thoroughness, on finding the details others missed. It's what had earned her a spot on the Joint Task Force investigating the most infamous prison escape in recent history. But this felt different, personal in a way that violated every protocol she'd spent decades following. She moved deeper into the abandoned subway system, her flashlight revealing sections of tiled walls that spoke of Mexico City's ambitious underground transit dreams from the 1960s. The earthquake that year had ended those dreams, sealing these tunnels and leaving them to decay in darkness, perfect for the kind of people who traded in human misery. The scratches on the walls grew more numerous as she progressed. Some were clearly fresh, probably from El Chapo's recent passage, but others had the weathered look of decades-old desperation. Maria photographed everything, her camera flash illuminating the tunnel in stark, grotesque snapshots. Names carved into concrete, dates spanning from the 1970s to just months ago. Hash marks that could have been counting days, weeks, or years. Her phone buzzed with a text from her supervisor in El Paso. "Need your preliminary assessment by 1800. Press conference tomorrow." The mundane reminder of bureaucratic deadlines felt surreal in this subterranean tomb of secrets. Maria had joined the DEA in 1988, 3 years after Carmen's disappearance had shattered her family. Her parents never recovered from the loss, her mother retreating into pills and prayer, her father drinking himself to death by the time Maria graduated college. She'd chosen this career as penance, as purpose, throwing herself into the fight against the cartels that had probably taken her sister. But she'd always imagined Carmen's fate had played out in some remote desert, not in tunnels beneath the city where they'd shared their last happy memories. The tunnel branched ahead, creating a T intersection that wasn't on any of the blueprints she'd studied. Maria chose the left passage, following what appeared to be more recent foot traffic in the accumulated sediment. The air grew thicker, more oppressive, carrying scents she didn't want to identify. 50 yards further, her light caught something that made her stop cold. A small chamber had been carved out of the tunnel wall, fitted with metal rings embedded in the concrete. Restraints. Recent scratches in the walls suggested this room had seen use within the past few years. Maria's stomach lurched as she documented the scene, her professional detachment warring with a growing sense of horror at what this network had facilitated. Her radio crackled again. "Castillo, time's up. We need you back at command. En route," she lied, pressing deeper into the darkness. The tunnel curved ahead, and her flashlight beam revealed another chamber, larger than the first. But this one contained something that stopped her breath entirely. A small backpack, child-sized, sat in the corner where it had been forgotten or abandoned. The fabric was faded and water-stained, but Maria recognized the distinctive pattern immediately: rainbow stripes on blue canvas. She'd had one just like it. Carmen had had one exactly like it. Maria's hands shook as she approached the backpack, her flashlight beam wavering across its surface. 30 years of wondering, of building theories and chasing shadows, had led to this moment in a forgotten tunnel beneath Mexico City. She reached for the zipper, knowing that whatever she found inside would either answer the question that had haunted her entire adult life or destroy her completely. The metal zipper stuck, corroded by decades of moisture and neglect, but finally gave way with a soft rasp that echoed through the chamber like a sigh. The sound of her own heartbeat thundered in Maria's ears as she stared into the open backpack, her flashlight beam revealing contents that had been preserved by the tunnel's dry sections like artifacts in a tomb. A child's coloring book, its pages warped but still recognizable. Disney princesses that Carmen had been obsessed with during their last vacation together. A small plastic comb with missing teeth. And there, wrapped in what remained of a plastic sandwich bag, a Polaroid photograph. Maria's vision blurred as she lifted the photo with trembling fingers. 3 children smiled back at her from the bright sunshine of Plaza de la Constitución. Herself at 17, Carmen at 12, and their cousin Diego at 15. Their last day together before Carmen vanished from their hotel room that night, leaving behind only questions that had shaped every decision Maria had made since. "Castillo!" The radio's harsh crackle shattered the moment. "We need you topside now. Mexican authorities are shutting us down." Maria quickly pocketed the photograph and sealed the backpack in an evidence bag, her training taking over even as her world tilted off its axis. She couldn't process this here, not in the suffocating darkness with officials breathing down her neck. Whatever truth this tunnel held would have to wait. The climb back to street level felt eternal, each step carrying her further from answers and closer to the carefully constructed life she'd built on the foundation of her loss. By the time she emerged from the small house that had hidden El Chapo's escape route, the harsh Mexican sun felt like a physical assault after the tunnel's embrace. Deputy Director Frank Morrison waited by their command vehicle, his face grim with the particular expression Maria had learned meant political complications. At 62, Morrison had survived 3 decades of DEA politics by reading situations better than crime scenes, and right now he looked like a man calculating damage control. "What took you so long down there?" he asked, lighting his 3rd cigarette of the hour. "The Mexicans want us out, and Washington wants answers." "The tunnel system is extensive," Maria replied, falling back into the professional tone that had served as armor for 30 years. "We're looking at a trafficking network that predates El Chapo's operation by decades." Morrison studied her with the sharp eyes that had made him one of the DEA's most effective administrators. "You look like you've seen a ghost. Everything okay?" Maria forced herself to meet his gaze, knowing that any sign of emotional compromise could derail her career at this critical juncture. She was 2 years from retirement, with a pension that represented security after a lifetime of modest government salaries. More importantly, she held a position that gave her access to intelligence networks spanning both sides of the border, access she might need to follow the thread she'd just discovered. "Just the usual reaction to finding evidence of human trafficking," she said. "Those chambers weren't built for drug smuggling." The drive back to their hotel in Mexico City gave Maria time to think, to plan. She shared a rental car with agent Rebecca Chen, her junior partner for the past 3 years at 34. Rebecca represented everything Maria might have been if she hadn't spent her career chasing ghosts, ambitious, focused, unburdened by the weight of personal tragedy. "You've been quiet since we came up," Rebecca observed, navigating the chaotic Mexico City traffic with the confidence of someone who saw obstacles as challenges rather than omens. "Find something interesting down there?" Maria watched the city flow past their windows, the same streets where she and Carmen had wandered as tourists 30 years ago, buying candy from vendors and practicing their high school Spanish. Now those memories felt like scenes from someone else's life. "Just thinking about the scope of what we're dealing with," Maria replied. "This isn't just about one escape. There's something bigger here." Rebecca glanced at her partner, noting the tension that had become increasingly common in recent months. "You've been eligible for retirement for 2 years now. Ever think about taking it? You could consult, make twice the money, set your own hours." The suggestion stung because Rebecca was right. Maria's small apartment in El Paso felt more like a way station than a home. Her few relationships had withered under the demands of a career that required constant travel and emotional unavailability. She had no children, few close friends outside the job, and savings that would allow for a comfortable if modest retirement. But leaving now would mean abandoning the only real lead she'd ever found about Carmen's fate. "Maybe after this case," Maria said, the lie coming easily after decades of practice. That evening, alone in her hotel room, Maria spread the contents of her investigation across the small desk. Official photographs, tunnel blueprints, and hidden among them, the Polaroid from Carmen's backpack. The evidence bag containing the backpack itself sat in the room's safe, a secret that could end her career if discovered. She opened her laptop and began typing her preliminary report, constructing the careful language that would keep the investigation active without revealing the personal stake that had just transformed everything. Outside her window, Mexico City pulsed with life, while below the streets, in darkness that had hidden secrets for decades, the truth waited. The ringing phone shattered Maria's fragile concentration at 3:47 a.m. She'd been staring at her laptop screen for hours, the cursor blinking accusingly after 2 sentences of her preliminary report. Every word she'd attempted to write felt like a betrayal, either of her professional ethics or of Carmen's memory. "Castillo." Her voice came out rougher than intended. "Maria, it's Morrison. We have a problem." She sat up straighter, instantly alert despite the lack of sleep. Morrison never called agents by their first names unless the situation had moved beyond standard protocol. "What kind of problem?" "The kind that comes from Washington at midnight. Get dressed. I'm picking you up in 20 minutes. The line went dead, leaving Maria staring at her phone in the blue glow of her laptop screen. She glanced at the evidence bag in the open safe, Carmen's backpack a dark accusation in the shadows. Whatever was happening, it threatened to pull her away from the only real lead she'd found in 30 years. Morrison's SUV idled outside the hotel exactly 20 minutes later, exhaust visible in the cool pre-dawn air. Maria slid into the passenger seat, noting the tension in his jaw and the way his hands gripped the steering wheel with white-knuckled intensity. "Where are we going?" she asked. "The embassy." "And Maria?" He turned to look at her directly. "Whatever you found down in those tunnels yesterday, I need to know about it now, before we walk into this meeting." The weight of the Polaroid in her jacket pocket seemed to increase tenfold. Maria studied Morrison's profile as he navigated the empty streets, calculating risks and possibilities. In 30 years of working together, he'd never lied to her, but she'd also never found herself in a position where the truth could destroy everything. "I found evidence of long-term human trafficking operations," she said carefully. "Chambers that have been in use for decades. What else?" The question hung between them like a loaded weapon. Maria felt the photograph burning against her ribs, its presence both a promise and a threat. Morrison knew her too well. He could sense she was holding back. Personal effects. Evidence that victims may have been held in those tunnels going back to the 1980s. Morrison pulled the SUV to the curb abruptly, the sudden stop throwing Maria against her seatbelt. He turned to face her fully, his expression grim in the streetlight's orange glow. "Maria, what I'm about to tell you doesn't leave this car." 3 hours ago, our contact at Mexican intelligence was found dead in his apartment. Single gunshot, professional execution. 2 hours ago, someone broke into the evidence locker at the Altiplano site. They didn't take anything related to El Chapo's escape, but several boxes of older case files went missing. The implications hit Maria like a physical blow. Someone was cleaning house, eliminating connections to whatever network those tunnels had served. And if they knew about the evidence locker, they might know about her investigation. "How much does Washington know about what we found down there?" she asked. That's what this meeting is about. State Department, DEA upper management, and some people who don't usually introduce themselves with their real names. Morrison started driving again, his voice dropping lower. "Maria, I've seen this dance before. Someone powerful is scared, which means someone powerful has something to hide. The question is whether we're about to become assets or liabilities." The U.S. Embassy loomed ahead, its imposing facade lit by security floods that turned the surrounding block into artificial daylight. Maria watched early morning workers beginning their commutes, ordinary people living ordinary lives, unaware that somewhere beneath their feet lay tunnels that connected decades of secrets. Morrison parked in the embassy's secure lot and turned off the engine, but made no move to exit the vehicle. "I need to ask you something, and I need you to be completely honest with me." Maria's heart rate spiked. "Okay. Is there any reason, professional or personal, why someone might want to remove you from this investigation?" The question struck at the heart of everything Maria had spent her career hiding. The Polaroid seemed to burn against her chest as she considered her options. She could lie, continue the deception that had protected her for 30 years, and hope that Morrison's political instincts could navigate whatever storm was brewing inside the embassy. Or she could tell him the truth and trust that 3 decades of partnership meant something. Before she could answer, Morrison's phone buzzed with a text. He glanced at the screen and swore softly. "They've moved the meeting up. We need to go in now." He looked at her one final time. "Whatever you're not telling me, Maria, it better not come back to bite us both." As they walked toward the embassy's entrance, Maria felt the weight of an impossible choice settling on her shoulders. In a few minutes, she would sit across from people who could either help her find the truth about Carmen or bury both of them forever. The morning air carried the distant sound of the city waking up, but all Maria could hear was the echo of 30 years of questions finally demanding answers. The embassy's marble lobby felt like a mausoleum as their footsteps echoed across the polished floor. Maria's hand instinctively moved to her jacket pocket, checking for the Polaroid's presence one more time. Each step forward felt like betrayal of Carmen, of the truth, of everything she'd spent 30 years searching for. But turning back now would mean losing her only chance to follow this lead wherever it might take her. "Second thoughts?" Morrison asked quietly as they approached the elevator bank. "Always," Maria replied, though the admission felt dangerous in this place where words could be weapons. The elevator climbed silently to the 7th floor, carrying them toward people who specialized in making inconvenient truths disappear. Maria had witnessed it before, investigations that suddenly lost funding, evidence that mysteriously became inadmissible, careers that ended with quiet transfers to forgotten field offices. The machinery of institutional protection was efficient and merciless. Morrison straightened his tie as the doors opened, transforming into the political animal that had kept him alive in Washington for 3 decades. "Remember," he murmured, "we're here to brief them, not to be briefed. Keep control of the narrative." But Maria knew they'd lost control the moment someone executed their Mexican contact. This meeting wasn't about briefing anyone. It was about determining how much damage needed to be contained. The conference room held 5 people, though only 3 bothered to introduce themselves. Deputy Assistant Secretary Patricia Walsh from State represented the official government interest. DEA Associate Director James Crawford spoke for their home agency. The third introduced himself simply as Coordinator Martinez from an unnamed department, his suit too expensive and his eyes too cold for any agency Maria recognized. The other 2 men sat silently at the far end of the table, their presence radiating the kind of authority that didn't require explanation. "Agent Castillo," Walsh began, consulting a tablet with Maria's entire career summarized in digital form. Impressive record. 27 years with DEA, multiple commendations, specialist in cartel operations along the Texas-Mexico corridor. The praise felt like setup for a fall. Maria nodded non-committally, hyper-aware of the Polaroid's weight against her ribs. "We understand you spent considerable time yesterday in the tunnel system beneath Altiplano," Crawford continued, his tone suggesting this was somehow problematic. "Walk us through what you discovered." This was the moment of truth. Maria could deliver a sanitized version that focused solely on El Chapo's escape route, keeping Carmen's backpack and its implications buried in her personal investigation. Or she could reveal the full scope of what she'd found, trusting that institutional momentum would carry her toward answers rather than oblivion. "The tunnel connects to an extensive network of abandoned subway infrastructure from the 1960s, she began carefully. "Evidence suggests it's been used for human trafficking operations spanning multiple decades." "Evidence?" Martinez leaned forward, his interest sharp and predatory. Maria felt Morrison's tension beside her, a warning that she was approaching dangerous territory. Holding chambers, personal effects, markings that indicate long-term imprisonment of victims. "Did you collect any of this evidence?" Walsh asked, her fingers poised over her tablet. The question hung in the air like smoke from a fired weapon. Maria understood that her answer would determine everything that followed, whether she remained part of this investigation or became another inconvenient truth requiring management. "Standard documentation," she replied. "Photographs, measurements, preliminary assessment for a full forensic team." It wasn't exactly a lie, but it wasn't the complete truth either. The backpack sat in her hotel safe, a secret that grew heavier with each passing hour. Every moment she didn't report it was another step away from proper procedure, another compromise of the ethical standards that had guided her career. About this forensic team, one of the silent men spoke for the first time, his accent suggesting East Coast education and unlimited funding. "That won't be necessary. Mexican authorities are sealing those tunnels for public safety reasons." The words hit Maria like ice water. They were shutting down the investigation, burying whatever secrets those tunnels held along with any chance she had of learning Carmen's fate. 30 years of searching, reduced to a political calculation made by people who saw human suffering as an acceptable cost of maintaining relationships. "Sir," Morrison interjected, "those tunnels represent one of the most significant human trafficking discoveries in recent—" "Deputy Director Morrison," Walsh interrupted, "I think you misunderstand the scope of our concerns here. This isn't about human trafficking. This is about maintaining operational security for ongoing investigations that span multiple jurisdictions and agencies." Maria felt the walls closing in, the familiar sensation of bureaucratic machinery grinding toward a predetermined conclusion. But beneath her professional resignation, something else stirred, a rage that had been building for 30 years, fed by every case file that disappeared, every lead that evaporated, every family that never got answers. The Polaroid in her pocket suddenly felt less like evidence and more like ammunition. Maria's hand closed around the Polaroid through her jacket fabric, feeling its edges sharp against her palm. The silence in the conference room stretched like a wire about to snap, and she realized this moment would define everything that came after. 30 years of playing by rules that had never served Carmen, never served the families still searching, never served anyone except the people sitting across from her now, with their expensive suits and careful words. "I need to use the restroom," she said quietly. Walsh glanced up from her tablet with mild irritation. "Agent Castillo, we're not finished here." "Just 5 minutes." Maria stood, her legs steadier than she'd expected. Morrison's eyes tracked her movement with growing concern, but she avoided his gaze. Looking at him now would only remind her of everything she was about to lose. The bathroom's harsh fluorescent lighting revealed the face of a woman who had spent 3 decades compromising, accommodating, accepting half-truths and political necessities. Maria stared at her reflection and made a decision that felt like stepping off a cliff. She pulled out her phone and typed a text to Rebecca. "Get the evidence bag from my hotel safe. Combination 0712. Take it to the lab at the embassy. Full analysis, priority 1. Don't ask questions." Her finger hovered over the send button. Once Rebecca had the backpack, there would be no hiding Maria's breach of protocol. The investigation would explode beyond anyone's ability to contain it. Her career would end in disgrace, her pension would evaporate, and she'd face potential criminal charges for tampering with evidence. But Carmen's face looked back at her from that Polaroid, 17 years old and terrified in some underground chamber that might still exist beneath Mexico City's streets. Maria hit send. When she returned to the conference room, the atmosphere had shifted. Crawford was leaning forward with predatory intensity, while the unnamed men at the end of the table watched her with new interest. "Agent Castillo," Martinez said, his voice carrying a tone that suggested he knew exactly what she'd just done. "We've been discussing your future involvement in this case." "Oh?" Maria settled back into her chair, surprised by how calm she felt. The die was cast now. Whatever happened next, she was finally moving toward truth instead of away from it. "There are concerns about your objectivity," Walsh continued, consulting her tablet with renewed focus. "Your request for extended assignment in Mexico City, your unusual interest in cold cases from the 1980s, certain irregularities in your recent travel patterns. They'd been watching her. How long had they known about her private search for Carmen?" Maria felt a chill that had nothing to do with the embassy's aggressive air conditioning. "I'm not sure what you're implying," she said, though she understood perfectly. Morrison shifted beside her, his loyalty warring with his political instincts. "Agent Castillo has an exemplary record of—" "Agent Castillo has a sister who disappeared in Mexico 30 years ago," the silent man interrupted. "A sister who vanished during the exact time period when these tunnels were being actively used for human trafficking." The words hung in the air like an accusation. Maria felt the room's dynamics shift as everyone recalibrated their understanding of her motivations. She was no longer a neutral investigator, but a compromised agent pursuing a personal agenda. "That's irrelevant to the current investigation," she said, but even as the words left her mouth, she knew how hollow they sounded. "Is it?" Walsh's fingers danced across her tablet screen. "Because it seems to us that your judgment might be clouded by personal considerations, the kind of clouded judgment that could compromise ongoing operations." Maria's phone buzzed with a text from Rebecca on my way to the lab. "What the hell is this about?" Too late to turn back now. Maria looked around the table at faces that had already written her off, already decided her fate. But for the first time in 30 years, she felt the clarity that came from choosing truth over security. "You're right," she said quietly. "My judgment is compromised. It has been for 30 years, but that doesn't make what I found down there any less real." The silent man at the end of the table smiled, an expression that held no warmth. "Agent Castillo, you're being reassigned effective immediately. You'll return to El Paso and submit to a full internal investigation. And if I refuse, then you'll be suspended pending criminal charges for evidence tampering." Maria stood slowly, her decision crystallizing with each passing second. They could destroy her career, but they couldn't stop Rebecca from analyzing that backpack. They could silence her officially, but they couldn't erase what she'd already set in motion. "I guess you'll have to suspend me then," she said, walking toward the door. Morrison called after her, his voice tight with disbelief. "Maria, think about what you're doing." She paused at the threshold, her hand on the door handle. "I have been, Frank. For 30 years, the hallway beyond felt like stepping into another world, one where the truth mattered more than convenience, where some secrets were too important to keep buried." Behind her, she could hear urgent whispers and the sound of phones being pulled from pockets. They would try to stop her now. But Maria had finally crossed the line between seeking permission and taking action, and there was no going back. The elevator descended with mechanical precision, carrying Maria away from her old life and towards something she couldn't yet define. Her phone vibrated constantly, Morrison trying to reach her, probably on orders from the people upstairs who were already calculating how to minimize the damage she'd just unleashed. She turned it off and watched the floor numbers drop, each one marking another step into uncharted territory. The embassy lobby buzzed with morning activity, but Maria felt invisible moving through it. She was no longer Agent Castillo with clearances and authority. She was a rogue operative whose credentials would be revoked within hours. The transformation felt both terrifying and liberating, like shedding skin that had grown too tight over 3 decades of compromise. Outside, Mexico City's heat hit her like a physical force. She hailed a taxi and gave the driver Rebecca's lab address, then settled back to consider what she'd just done. The smart play would have been to cooperate, take the reassignment, and pursue Carmen's case through unofficial channels over the next few years. But Maria was done with smart plays. Smart plays had given her 30 years of dead ends and sanitized reports that buried more truth than they revealed. Her phone buzzed with a call from an unknown number. Against her better judgment, she answered. Agent Castillo. The voice was Martinez from the conference room, his tone clipped and professional. You're making a mistake. I don't think I am. You have no idea what you're dealing with. The people who run those tunnels don't distinguish between federal agents and civilians when protecting their interests. Maria watched Mexico City flow past the taxi window. Millions of people going about their lives, unaware of the networks of exploitation running beneath their feet. Are you threatening me? I'm warning you. Walk away now, and this ends with your suspension. Keep pushing, and it ends much worse. The line went dead. Maria stared at the phone, realizing that her situation had just shifted from administrative punishment to physical danger. But instead of fear, she felt a strange sense of completion. For 30 years, she'd wondered if the people who took Carmen were still out there. Now she knew they were, and they were scared enough to threaten a federal agent. That meant she was getting close. The taxi pulled up to a nondescript building in the university district. Rebecca's forensics lab occupied the third floor of what looked like an abandoned office complex, but Maria knew appearances were deceiving. Rebecca's equipment was better than what most government labs could afford, funded by contracts with agencies that needed results without bureaucratic oversight. Maria found Rebecca hunched over a microscope, the backpack's contents spread across examination tables like archaeological artifacts. Carmen's diary lay open under bright lights, its pages yellow with age but still readable. Jesus, Maria. Rebecca looked up, her expression torn between fascination and concern. Where did you find this stuff? In one of the holding chambers. How much have you analyzed? Enough to know you're in deep shit. Rebecca gestured to a computer screen displaying DNA analysis results. I ran samples from the backpack against missing persons databases. 3 matches so far, all from cases spanning 1985 to 1992, all young women who disappeared while traveling in Mexico. Maria's heart hammered as she approached the diary. Carmen's handwriting looked exactly as she remembered, careful loops and curves that spoke of a girl who took pride in her penmanship. The entries were brief, scared observations about captivity in the place below, and fragments of overheard conversations. There's more, Rebecca continued, pulling up another screen. The fabric samples contained synthetic fibers that weren't commonly available until the mid-1980s, which confirms the timeline. But here's the interesting part. Some of the biological samples show evidence of ongoing habitation. People were being held in those chambers as recently as last year. The implications hit Maria like cold water. The tunnels weren't just historical crime scenes, they were active facilities. El Chapo's escape route had inadvertently exposed a trafficking network that was still operational, still destroying lives, while people in conference rooms decided whether investigating was politically convenient. Rebecca, I need you to send copies of everything to 3 places. Maria pulled out a notepad and began writing addresses. The Mexico City Prosecutor's Office, the FBI's Human Trafficking Task Force, and this journalist at the Washington Post who specializes in cartel investigations. Maria, if you're trying to blow this open, someone's going to try to stop you. They already are. Maria touched Carmen's diary gently, feeling the weight of 30 years of wondering finally balanced against concrete answers. But they're too late. Too many people know now. Rebecca looked at her with something approaching admiration. You're really going to burn it all down, aren't you? Maria thought about Morrison, about her pension, about the career that had defined her adult life. Then she looked at Carmen's handwriting and felt her sister's presence in the room like a promise finally being kept. Sometimes, she said quietly, that's the only way to let the light in. The lab fell silent except for the hum of Rebecca's equipment, but Maria could feel the weight of what came next pressing down on them both. She stared at Carmen's diary, its pages filled with her sister's careful documentation of horror, and realized that exposing the truth was only the beginning. The people who had run those tunnels for decades wouldn't simply accept their network being dismantled by an angry DEA agent and a forensics expert working out of a converted office building. "How long before you can get the evidence distributed?" Maria asked, her voice steadier than she felt. Rebecca was already pulling up email addresses on her secure server. 20 minutes, maybe less. But Maria, once this goes out, there's no taking it back. Your career, my contracts with federal agencies, everything we've built, it's all gone. It was gone the moment they decided to seal those tunnels. Maria picked up one of the Polaroids Rebecca had enhanced, showing a clearer image of Carmen's terrified face. How many families never got answers because it was politically inconvenient? How many girls disappeared into that system while bureaucrats worried about diplomatic relations? Her phone rang. Morrison again. This time she answered. "Maria, for God's sake, where are you?" His voice carried genuine panic. "They've got people looking for you. This isn't just about your suspension anymore." "What do you mean?" "Martinez made some calls after you left. Apparently, your little evidence collection has rattled some very important cages. People who don't usually get involved in operational matters are suddenly very interested in your activities." Maria felt Rebecca's eyes on her, watching the conversation with growing alarm. "Frank, I need you to listen to me carefully. In about 15 minutes, evidence of an active human trafficking network is going to hit multiple newsrooms and law enforcement agencies simultaneously. When that happens, a lot of powerful people are going to be very motivated to make this story disappear." "Jesus Christ, Maria. You can't." "I already have. But I need you to do something for me." She pulled out the notepad where she'd written the distribution addresses. "Call those contacts and tell them to expect something big. Tell them to have security ready, because someone's going to try to suppress this." The line went quiet for a long moment. When Morrison spoke again, his voice carried the weight of a man watching his worldview crumble in real time. "You're asking me to choose between my career and doing the right thing. I'm asking you to remember why we became federal agents in the first place." Maria looked at Carmen's diary again, feeling her sister's presence like a hand on her shoulder. "Before we learned to compromise, before we learned to accept what was politically feasible, we wanted to help people." Rebecca gestured frantically from her computer. The files were ready to send, waiting only for Maria's final authorization. Once those emails went out, there would be no hiding, no negotiating, no managing the consequences through proper channels. "Frank, I have to go, but promise me something. When they try to spin this as the actions of a rogue agent with personal motivations, remember what you saw in those tunnels. Remember that real people suffered while we followed procedures." She ended the call and nodded to Rebecca. "Send it." Rebecca's fingers flew across the keyboard, uploading gigabytes of evidence to secure servers around the world. DNA analysis, enhanced photographs, Carmen's diary entries, architectural surveys of the tunnel system. 30 years of buried truth exploding into daylight with the click of a mouse. "Done," Rebecca said quietly. "No going back now." Maria's phone immediately erupted with calls from unknown numbers. She turned it off again and moved to the window, looking down at the street below. A black SUV was parked across from the building, its occupants hidden behind tinted windows. "They found us," she said. Rebecca joined her at the window, her face pale. "How is that possible? This location isn't connected to any government databases." Martinez said they don't distinguish between federal agents and civilians. Maria gathered Carmen's diary and the enhanced photographs, slipping them into her jacket. "They've been running this network for decades. They have resources we can't imagine." A second SUV pulled up behind the first. Maria counted at least 6 figures emerging, moving with the coordinated precision of professional operatives. Not law enforcement, something else entirely. "Rebecca, is there another way out of here?" "Service elevator in the back. Connects to the parking garage." Rebecca was already shutting down her equipment, wiping hard drives with practiced efficiency. "But Maria, where can we go? If they found us here, they can find us anywhere." Maria thought about the tunnel system beneath the city, about Carmen's diary entries mentioning other locations, other facilities that might still exist. The network wasn't just about trafficking. It was about control, about having places where inconvenient people could disappear without trace. "We go underground," she said. "But first, we make sure the story survives even if we don't." Rebecca pulled out a tablet and began typing rapidly, her fingers trembling slightly as she worked. "Insurance policy," she muttered, uploading everything to multiple cloud servers. "Dead man's switch. If I don't check in every 12 hours, everything gets released to WikiLeaks and every major news outlet simultaneously." Maria watched the men from the SUVs disappear into the building's lobby. Professional but not federal, their movements had the fluid coordination of private military contractors, the kind of people governments hired when they needed problems to disappear completely. "How long do we have?" Rebecca asked, still typing. "Maybe 3 minutes." Maria's mind raced through their options. The service elevator would buy them time, but not much. These weren't amateurs who would miss obvious escape routes. Carmen's diary mentions a subway entrance near the university. Something about the metal door with 3 locks that connected to the main tunnels. You want to hide in the same place they've been trafficking people for 30 years? It's the one place they can't use heavy equipment or call in official backup. Maria heard the elevator ding in the hallway outside. Sometimes you have to enter the monster's belly to kill it. They grabbed what they could carry and ran for the back corridor. The service elevator was ancient and slow, its cables groaning as they descended toward the parking garage. Rebecca clutched her laptop while Maria held Carmen's diary against her chest like a talisman. "Maria," Rebecca whispered as they reached the basement level, what if we find something down there that you don't want to know?" The question hit like a physical blow. For 30 years, Maria had sustained herself on the possibility that Carmen might somehow still be alive, might have escaped or been rescued. But the diary entries spoke of a system designed to consume young women completely, leaving no trace except faded Polaroids and abandoned backpacks. "Then I'll finally know," she said quietly. "And I can stop wondering." The garage was dimly lit, filled with shadows that could hide anything. They moved between concrete pillars toward the exit, but Maria could hear footsteps echoing from the stairwell behind them. Their pursuers had found the service elevator. "This way," Rebecca hissed, leading them toward a maintenance tunnel that connected to the city's storm drain system. "It's not glamorous, but it leads to the old subway construction zones." They crawled through a narrow opening barely wide enough for one person, emerging into a concrete tunnel that smelled of rust and stagnant water. Behind them, Maria could hear voices speaking Spanish in low, urgent tones, professional hunters discussing their prey. The tunnel stretched ahead into darkness, but Rebecca had grabbed an emergency flashlight from her lab. Its beam revealed graffiti-covered walls and debris from decades of neglect. This was Mexico City's forgotten infrastructure, the networks of tunnels and passages that connected beneath the surface like arteries in a buried body. According to Carmen's diary, there should be an entrance marked with 3 diagonal scratches, Maria said, studying her sister's handwriting by flashlight. She counted steps from the university, 237 from the main gate. They moved through the darkness, Maria's heart pounding with more than just physical exertion. Every step took her deeper into the world that had swallowed Carmen, the shadow network that existed parallel to the official city above. She could feel the weight of 30 years of grief and uncertainty transforming into something sharper and more dangerous, a need for justice that transcended personal consequences. The tunnel branched ahead, offering 3 possible routes. Rebecca swept her flashlight across the walls, revealing old construction markings and maintenance numbers. But there, barely visible in the beam's edge, were 3 diagonal scratches carved deep into the concrete. "Found it," Maria breathed. The scratches marked a heavy metal door set into the tunnel wall, secured with 3 massive locks that looked far newer than the surrounding infrastructure. Someone had been maintaining this entrance, keeping it operational despite the network's supposed dormancy. As they approached, Maria heard something that made her blood freeze, the distant sound of voices echoing from somewhere beyond the door. Not the voices of their pursuers, but conversation in multiple languages, casual and ongoing. The trafficking network wasn't just still active, it was thriving. Rebecca grabbed Maria's arm, her eyes wide with terror. "We need to leave. Now. Call the FBI, the Mexican authorities, anyone with enough firepower to—" "No," Maria pulled out the lock-picking tools she'd carried since her early days in narcotics. They'll just find another location, destroy the evidence, disappear into new tunnels. This is our only chance to end it completely. As she worked on the first lock, Maria could hear footsteps in the tunnel behind them. Their pursuers had found their trail. Ahead lay a network that had destroyed her family and countless others. She was trapped between two forms of certain death, armed with nothing but a 30-year-old diary and an unshakable need for justice. The first lock clicked open, and Maria realized that everything she'd learned about survival, about investigation, about the dark compromises that kept evil functioning in the world, was about to be tested in the most fundamental way possible. The second lock proved more stubborn, its tumblers corroded by decades of underground moisture. Maria's hands shook as she worked the picks, sweat dripping onto the tools despite the tunnel's chill. Behind them, flashlight beams began dancing across the tunnel walls. Their pursuers were maybe 2 minutes away. "Maria, please," Rebecca whispered, her voice breaking. "We can't fight these people. We're forensic analysts, not soldiers." The voices beyond the door grew louder, and Maria caught fragments of conversation, orders being given in Spanish about new arrivals and transport schedules. Her stomach lurched as she realized they were listening to the operational heart of an active trafficking ring, the same system that had devoured Carmen 3 decades ago. The second lock clicked open just as automatic weapon fire erupted in the tunnel behind them. Their pursuers weren't just trying to capture them anymore. They were shooting to kill. Concrete chips exploded around them as bullets ricocheted off the tunnel walls. "Get down!" Maria shoved Rebecca behind a support beam and attacked the third lock with desperate fury. Her picks slipped twice, precious seconds evaporating as the gunfire grew closer. She could hear boots splashing through standing water, tactical commands being shouted in English with military precision. The final lock surrendered just as a bullet grazed Maria's shoulder, spinning her against the metal door. Pain exploded down her arm, but she managed to wrench the door open and push Rebecca through the gap. They tumbled into a nightmare. The chamber beyond was massive, carved from bedrock and reinforced with modern steel supports. Rows of makeshift cells lined the walls, some occupied by terrified young women who shrank back from their flashlight beam. The air reeked of human waste and desperation, a smell that spoke of systematic dehumanization spanning generations. But it was the far end of the chamber that made Maria's world collapse. Carmen sat chained to the wall. Not a memory, not a ghost. Her sister, alive but broken, her hair white and her eyes holding the hollow stare of someone whose mind had retreated from unbearable reality. She looked up as the flashlight beam found her face, and Maria saw a flicker of recognition that cut deeper than any physical wound. "Carmen?" Maria's voice cracked as she stumbled forward, her wounded arm forgotten. Her sister's lips moved soundlessly, forming words that had no breath behind them. 30 years of captivity had reduced Carmen to something barely human, a living reminder of what happened to people who disappeared into the system's depths. Rebecca gasped behind her. "Jesus Christ, Maria, we have to get her out of here." But even as Maria fumbled for the keys to Carmen's restraints, she heard the voices in the chamber changing tone. Their presence had been detected. Footsteps echoed from multiple tunnels leading into the space, and she realized they had walked into the center of a spider's web with no way out. A spotlight blazed to life, blinding them both. When Maria's vision cleared, a dozen armed figures had emerged from concealed positions throughout the chamber. At their head stood a man in an expensive suit who looked completely out of place in the underground horror show. "Miss Castillo," he said in accented English, "you've been very difficult to locate." Maria positioned herself between the man and Carmen, her service weapon drawn despite knowing it was useless against such overwhelming force. "Let them go. All of them. Take me instead." The man laughed, a sound that echoed obscenely off the chamber walls. "You misunderstand your situation. This facility has operated successfully for 40 years because it maintains perfect operational security. No witnesses, no survivors, no stories that reach the surface. The evidence is already out there. Multiple news outlets, law enforcement agencies. Evidence that can be discredited as the fantasies of a mentally unstable agent seeking closure for family trauma." He gestured to one of his men, who handed him a tablet displaying news feeds. Your former supervisor has already issued statements about your psychological breakdown following suspension. Very sad case, really. Maria's heart sank as she realized the depth of their preparation. Morrison had been turned, probably threatened into cooperation. The carefully distributed evidence would be dismissed as fabrication, and she and Rebecca would simply disappear into the same system that had consumed Carmen. However, the man continued, your sister has been asking for you for 30 years. It seems cruel to separate family again so quickly. Maria looked into Carmen's eyes and saw something that destroyed her last hope. Her sister was beyond rescue. 3 decades of captivity had shattered her mind so completely that freedom would be another form of torture. The trafficking network hadn't just stolen Carmen's life, they had turned her into a living demonstration of what happened to people who crossed them. Behind her, Rebecca sobbed quietly as armed figures moved to secure the chamber exits. Their insurance policy, their evidence, their carefully planned exposure, none of it mattered. The system was too vast, too entrenched, too protected by official complicity to be destroyed by 2 women with laptops and good intentions. Maria had found her sister at last, only to lose everything else that had ever mattered.